And here's a short recap of mindfulness as a practice and as a way of living life. Although we practice primarily so that we're able to more naturally and spontaneously experience life in a more mindfully alert and attentive and engaged way. We place our attention on an object. That object oftentimes will be the body or the breath. It's very portable. Wherever we go, there it is, here we are. And so it lends itself nicely to a practice that costs nothing, where you don't have to go anywhere in particular, although it can be helpful to find an environment that's a little quieter for practicing so that we're a little bit more adept at bringing it into the moments of our life that aren't necessarily so quiet, that might be a little bit more chaotic. And so we place our attention on an object like the breath or the body. And what that means is it means that we come to more directly know and experience the breath moving through the body, the belly expanding and softening with the breath, or the air flowing into and out of our nose or mouth. It's an awareness that we're bringing to something that's happening that we have a direct connection to, when, as you know, we spend most of our day not aware of that. We could spend most of our life not aware of that. And so it's bringing our attention to something that's taking place in the present moment and something that's very much core and integral to who we are. And then because this mind wanders a great deal, and that's really the larger impediment, if you will, or challenge to practicing mindfulness or to being mindful, that this mind darts off. And while that can be a source of creativity, and the movement of the mind can bring upon ideas that seemingly come from nowhere and can be very helpful, so much of the time we are spent with a mind that's wandering, and we're not even aware it's wandering. And as we discussed, when the mind wanders unbidden, it tends to be to places that leave us feeling less energetic. Our mood tends to drop. We're not as happy or satisfied in those moments, and we're not even aware that we've departed from whatever it is that we were doing a few moments earlier. And so we place our attention on the breath or the body as a concentration practice. Can I keep my attention here? And then when we notice our mind wandering off, which we will again and again and again, and there's nothing wrong with that for all the reasons I've just indicated, it's the nature of the mind, and sometimes it can be even helpful. But when we're not interested in the mind wandering off, when we're really interested in staying put and focusing on a project or a task or a person or some material that we're reading or reviewing, the mind wandering off gets in the way. But we're really not that familiar with the movement of the mind. We don't really notice when it wanders away. And so we're practicing noticing the mind that wanders, and we're practicing doing something more skillful when it does, which is bringing our attention back. And so very simply, although hard to do, we place our attention on the breath or the sensations of the body. We rest our attention there for however long we choose, and I'm going to suggest to you 5 minutes or 10 minutes as a formal practice each day can be very helpful. And when our mind wanders off, and we realize it, that's mindfulness. We've woken up. We've realized the movement of the mind that we otherwise would have not realized, and then would have gotten lost in that train of thought and wherever it would have taken us. We gently bring our attention back to the object. And that is the primary mindfulness practice. It's a focused attention practice. It's one of placing our attention on an object, and when our mind wanders, bringing our attention back. It's oftentimes referred to as exercising the muscle of attention. Sometimes it can be very challenging to even realize that our mind has wandered, and even when we do, sometimes it can be challenging to bring our attention back. The more agitating, the more of concern that thought is, the more challenging it will be to bring our attention back, because we'll be so inclined to get lost in and want to stay with that thought or that concern, and or the feeling that that accompanies it. And then in time, what we begin to do is we cultivate the ability to keep our attention more firmly where we placed it, to realize more quickly when it moves off, and to more readily bring our attention back. And as you might imagine, this can be very helpful to paying attention to people at home, at work, to placing your attention on projects and tasks that you're working on, even if they're not as interesting and the mind is more inclined to wander. It's now less inclined to wander. And because of the very strong relationship between our attention and our capacity to keep our attention trained on where it is that we choose to place it, and the emotional reactivity that we can experience, the more we're able to strengthen that capacity to pay attention, the more we're able to readily regulate our emotional wherewithal, if you will, moment by moment. And William James said, and I think this is important as a reminder, he was a wonderful philosopher and psychologist, the faculty of bringing a wandering attention back again and again and again is the very root of judgment, character, and will. And I think that what I find most telling in his quote is again and again and again. He recognizes the meanderings of the mind and of the promise of learning to, like we train a puppy dog, the promise of learning to train our mind to stay put,